The lawyer's office smelled of pipe tobacco and the particular silence that falls over a room when men have decided a woman isn't worth the trouble of pretending to listen. It was March of 1923 and I was 18 years old, wearing a grey wool dress I'd borrowed from the schoolhouse matron in St. Louis, sitting on a chair that felt designed to make young women feel smaller than they already were. My name is Rosalie Caldwell. The men in that room called me the Caldwell girl when they bothered to call me anything at all. I had come to Willow Bend, Missouri because a letter had reached me 3 weeks prior, forwarded twice, informing me that my father, Silas Caldwell, a man the county had spent 30 years calling a fool, had died in February and left me his only possession, 48 acres of broken limestone ridge that nobody wanted and everybody laughed at. The lawyer, Mr. Ellery Vance, cleared his throat and read the will without looking up. The property, he said, has been assessed by the county at $22. I heard the laughter start before he finished the sentence. It came from Thaddeus Brennan first, a thick-shouldered man who owned half the valley and wanted the other half. Then it spread like a cough through the room. 6 men, maybe 7, laughing at a dead man's legacy and the girl who'd inherited it. I didn't say anything. I had learned a long time ago that men who laugh at you aren't listening anyway. But I was listening, and I heard something they didn't. I heard my father's voice. The earth keeps secrets from the loud, Rosalie, but it whispers to the patient. The lawyer's office smelled of pipe tobacco and the particular silence that falls over a room when men have decided a woman isn't worth the trouble of pretending to listen. It was March of 1923 and I was 18 years old, wearing a grey wool dress I'd borrowed from the schoolhouse matron in St. Louis, sitting on a chair that felt designed to make young women feel smaller than they already were. My name is Rosalie Caldwell. The men in that room called me the Caldwell girl when they bothered to call me anything at all. I had come to Willow Bend, Missouri because a letter had reached me 3 weeks prior, forwarded twice, informing me that my father, Silas Caldwell, a man the county had spent 30 years calling a fool, had died in February and left me his only possession, 48 acres of broken limestone ridge that nobody wanted and everybody laughed at. The lawyer, Mr. Ellery Vance, cleared his throat and read the will without looking up. The property, he said, has been assessed by the county at $22. I heard the laughter start before he finished the sentence. It came from Thaddeus Brennan first, a thick-shouldered man who owned half the valley and wanted the other half. Then it spread like a cough through the room. 6 men, maybe 7, laughing at a dead man's legacy and the girl who'd inherited it. I didn't say anything. I had learned a long time ago that men who laugh at you aren't listening anyway. But I was listening, and I heard something they didn't. I heard my father's voice. The earth keeps secrets from the loud, Rosalie, but it whispers to the patient. Mr. Vance adjusted his spectacles and continued reading. His voice had the practiced monotone of a man who'd read 100 wills and expected to read 100 more, each one distributing property to people who'd never earned it and didn't deserve it. The parcel, he said, includes 1 farmhouse of uncertain structural condition, 1 spring house, 1 barn, and whatever personal effects remain on the property. The land has not produced a paying crop in 11 years. More laughter, softer this time but meaner. The kind of laughter that isn't about joy, it's about making sure everyone in the room knows you're not the one being laughed at. Thaddeus Brennan leaned back in his chair. He was 48 years old and looked like a man who'd spent every one of those years getting exactly what he wanted. He owned the Brennan Dairy on the Valley Road. He owned the feed store. He owned the bank building, though not the bank itself, and the distinction bothered him. A girl and 48 acres of sinkhole, he said loud enough for me to hear. Silas couldn't have left her much worse if he'd tried. The man beside him, a land agent named Horace Kelter, who'd been trying to buy Ashner's Ridge for a decade, shook his head slowly. It's a shame, Kelter said. Silas was a decent man before he lost his mind. Spent the last 15 years dropping fishing lines down holes in the ground like a child playing at science. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I kept my face still. I had learned that too. How to sit in a room full of men who think you're stupid and let them keep thinking it? Mr. Vance cleared his throat again. It was a nervous sound, the throat clearing of a man who's about to say something he doesn't want to say. There is, he said, one additional clause. The room went quiet, not the comfortable quiet of men who finished their business. The tense quiet of men who sense complications. Mr. Vance read slowly. Due to the requirements of Missouri state law regarding property transfer to an unmarried female minor, the inheritance shall be held in co-trusteeship with a male party of legal standing until such time as Miss Caldwell reaches the age of 21 or enters into lawful marriage. The co-trustee, as named by the deceased, shall be Mr. Elijah Freeman of Douglas County. The silence that followed was different than the one before. This silence had weight. It had edges. Thaddeus Brennan sat forward in his chair. Freeman, he said. Elijah Freeman. That's correct, Mr. Vance said. The Negro farmer on the south slope. Mr. Freeman is a landowner in this county, yes. Brennan's face did something complicated. It wasn't quite anger and it wasn't quite amusement. It was the expression of a man watching something he thought was already his slipped sideways out of reach. You're telling me, Brennan said slowly, that Silas Caldwell left his property to a girl who can't legally own it without the signature of a Negro. The law requires a male co-trustee, Mr. Vance said. Mr. Caldwell named Mr. Freeman. And if the girl refuses Freeman as co-trustee, Mr. Vance turned a page. His hands were shaking slightly. I noticed that. I've always noticed when people's hands shake. In the event that Miss Caldwell declines the named co-trustee or fails to establish lawful partnership within 60 days of reading, the property shall be offered for public sale to settle outstanding debts with first right of purchase granted to Mr. Thaddeus Brennan at the assessed county value. Brennan smiled. It wasn't a good smile. $22, he said. That's correct. Well then, Brennan stood up. He was a tall man and he knew how to use the height. Seems to me the girl has a choice. She can partner with Freeman, which no decent family in this county will respect, or she can sell to me today for, let's say, $50, which is more than twice what the county says it's worth, and go back to St. Louis with enough money to start a real life. He looked at me for the first time since I had entered the room. What do you say, Miss Caldwell? I looked at him. I looked at the other men in the room. I looked at Mr. Vance, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I'd like to see the property, I said. Brennan blinked. There's nothing to see. Then it won't take long. Miss Caldwell. His voice had patience in it now, the patience men use when they're explaining simple things to simple people. Your father was a good man before he lost his way. But that ridge is worthless. It's 48 acres of rock and cedar and land that won't grow anything but regret. The house hasn't been lived in properly in 2 years. There's no livestock, no equipment worth the name. And even if there were, you'd need Freeman's signature on every transaction, every sale, every decision. Do you understand what that means? It means, I said, that my father trusted him. Your father, Brennan said, and his patience was gone now, died alone on that ridge in February and wasn't found for 3 days. That's what trust got him. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor and the sound was louder than I expected in that quiet room. I'd like to see the property, I said again. Mr. Vance gave me directions. Brennan watched me leave. I could feel his eyes on my back all the way to the door, and I knew the look in them even though I couldn't see it. It was the look of a man watching something he'd already counted slip through his fingers, and it was the look of a man who doesn't let things slip twice. The walk from town to Ashner's Ridge was 6 miles, and I had $11 to my name. I couldn't afford a wagon, and I wouldn't have known how to drive one anyway, so I walked. I had good boots, that was something. I'd saved for 8 months to buy them, worked evenings at the schoolhouse, doing mending and washing for the matron, put away every penny I could spare. They were brown leather with good thick soles, and they were the only thing I owned that I trusted completely. The road out of Willow Bend ran south along the valley floor for 3 miles before it started to climb. It was March and the morning was cold, but the kind of cold that promises warmth later. The sky was pale blue and cloudless. The fields on either side of the road were brown and waiting. I'd only seen my father 3 times that I could remember clearly. Once when I was 9, once when I was 12, and once when I was 15. My mother had died when I was 8, and there'd be no one else to take me, so I'd gone to the county home in Jefferson City. My father had visited when he could, which wasn't often. He wasn't a tall man. He wasn't particularly strong. He had gray eyes and rough hands and a way of looking at things, really looking at them, that made you feel like he was seeing something you couldn't see. The visit I remembered best was the one when I was 13. He'd come in the autumn and he'd brought me a piece of limestone about the size of my fist. It had a fossil pressed into it, a shell, he had said, from an ocean that used to cover Missouri 200 million years ago. I'd held it and looked at the spiral pattern frozen in the stone, and I'd asked him how he knew it was that old. Because the rock tells you, he'd said, if you listen. I'd looked at him like he was crazy, which, to be fair, was what everyone in Willow Bend thought anyway, but then he'd leaned forward and his voice had been quiet and serious, and he'd said something I'd never forgotten. The earth keeps secrets from the loud Rosalie, but it whispers to the patient, and if you learn to listen, really listen, it'll tell you things nobody else knows. He'd given me something else that day too, a brass compass. It was old, and the glass was scratched, but it worked. He'd shown me how the needle always found north, no matter how you turned it. You'll need this someday, he'd said. For what? Not for finding direction. He'd smiled. For finding depth. I hadn't understood what he meant. I still did not completely. But I'd kept the compass. It was in my coat pocket now, a small weight against my ribs. The road turned east and started climbing. The valley fell away behind me and the ridge rose ahead, a long spine of gray limestone and dark cedar breaking through the grass like a backbone. It took me 2 hours to reach the top. By the time I did, I was breathing hard and my legs ached, and the March sun was high enough to make me sweat under my coat. The farmhouse was smaller than I had imagined, 2 rooms, maybe 3. A stone chimney, a plank porch with gaps between the boards. The windows were cracked but not broken. The door was closed but not locked. I stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it for a long time. Behind the house I could see the barn gray wood sagging roof, a door that hung crooked on its hinges. To the left, built into the hillside itself, was a small stone structure I assumed was the spring house. And everywhere the land was broken. The ridge was split with cracks. Some were narrow, no wider than my hand. Others were wide enough to swallow a man. The limestone bedrock pushed up through the thin soil in long gray scars, and the cedar grew in twisted shapes, clinging to the rock like they were holding on for their lives. It looked like the land had cracked open a long time ago and never quite healed. I walked to the house. The porch boards creaked under my weight. The door opened with a sound like something sighing. Inside it was cold and dim, and it smelled of dust and damp and the particular emptiness of places where people used to live but don't anymore. There was a cast iron stove in the corner, a plank table with 2 chairs, a rope bed with no mattress, a shelf of books so warped with moisture they looked like they were melting. No curtains, no rugs, no pictures on the walls, just the bones of a life. I set my bag on the table and looked around. There was a ladder leading up to a loft and a door in the back wall that was closed. I tried the door. It was locked. I looked for a key and couldn't find one. I went back to the main room and stood in the center of it, turning slowly, trying to see what my father had seen when he lived here. The floorboards were uneven. Some of them had gaps between them wide enough to see the ground below. In the corner by the stove there was a box of kindling, and beside it a stack of split oak under a canvas tarp. The wood was dry, recently split. My father had cut this wood knowing he wouldn't be the one to burn it. That thought put something in my chest that felt like a fist closing. I had to sit down. I sat on one of the chairs and I put my hands flat on the table and I breathed slowly until the feeling passed. Then I stood up and I went to work. I found matches in a tin on the shelf. I found newspaper stuffed in the gaps around the window frames. I built a fire in the stove the way I'd been taught at the county home, kindling first, then small splits, then larger ones once the flame caught. The fire took. The stove ticked and groaned as the metal heated. Smoke curled up through the chimney and the room began very slowly to warm. I boiled water from the creek in a tin pot I found hanging on a nail. I ate a piece of cornbread I'd brought from town. I drank the water even though it tasted of metal and moss. Then I went back outside and I walked the property. The ridge ran roughly east to west, a long narrow spine about a quarter mile from end to end. The south slope fell away steeply into a hollow full of hardwoods. The north slope was gentler, rolling down into cedar breaks and patches of thin grass. And everywhere the cracks. I counted 17 of them. Some were narrow enough to step over, others were wide enough that I had to walk around them. One near the southwest corner of the property was about 4 feet across. I knelt at the edge of it and looked down. I couldn't see the bottom, just darkness going down and down. I lay flat on the limestone and leaned over as far as I dared. Cold air moved past my face, steady, slow. It smelled of wet stone and something else, something almost sweet like the air in a cellar where apples are stored. I picked up a pebble and dropped it into the crack. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, then I heard it hit. A small sound far away, like a coin dropped on a stone floor. I sat back on my heels. My heart was beating fast, and I didn't know why. 4 seconds. That's a long fall. That's a deep crack. That's something under the ground that nobody walking on top of it would ever know was there unless they stopped and looked and listened. I stayed there for a long time, kneeling at the edge of that crack, feeling the cold air on my face. And I thought about what my father had said. The earth keeps secrets from the loud, but it whispers to the patient. I walked back to the house as the sun was going down. The air was getting cold again, and the light was turning gold behind the cedars. I was hungry and tired, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. But I wasn't afraid. That surprised me. I'd been afraid a lot in my life. Afraid at the county home when the older girls would steal my things. Afraid in St. Louis when men would look at me in ways that made my skin crawl. Afraid in the lawyer's office when I'd heard the laughter. But standing on my father's ridge, looking at 48 acres of broken stone that nobody wanted, I wasn't afraid. I was curious. I went back inside. The fire had burned down, but the room was still warm. I lit a candle and I pulled the plank table closer to the stove and I started looking. I checked the shelves, I checked the loft, I checked under the bed frame and behind the stove and in every corner I could find. I was looking for something and I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was there. My father wouldn't have left me this place without leaving me a way to understand it. I found it on the third day. I'd spent the first 2 days just surviving, hauling water, gathering firewood, fixing the worst of the gaps in the walls with moss and clay from the creek bank. My hands were blistered and my shoulders ached, and I'd eaten nothing but cornmeal mush and wild onions I'd found growing near the spring house. But on the third day, I moved the warped books on the shelf, thinking maybe I could try them by the fire, and behind them I found a tin box. It was about the size of a shoebox, painted green with rust at the corners. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside were 5 notebooks, leather-bound pages, yellowed, filled with my father's handwriting. Small and careful and patient, the handwriting of a man who had more to say than paper to say it on. I took them to the table, I set the candle close, and I opened the first one. The first entry was dated August 1910. Lowered fishing line into the crack at the southwest corner today. Line ran out at 40 feet, hook still dangling. Air at the mouth of the crack measures 54 degrees by thermometer. Outside air is 91. Dropped a pebble. Counted 4 seconds before the sound. Something is down there. I mean to find out what. I read that entry 3 times, then I turned the page and kept reading. The notebooks were journals, records, observations made over years. My father had spent more than a decade studying this ridge, and he'd written down everything: temperature readings, airflow patterns, the width and depth of cracks, the sound of water moving underground, the direction of echoes, the smell of the air coming out of the earth. Page after page after page of patient, methodical observation. And slowly, as I read, I began to understand what my father had found. He'd found a cave, not a small cave, not a hole, a cave system. The ridge was hollow. Under the thin soil and the broken limestone, there was a network of passages carved by water over thousands of years. And those passages were still there, still intact, still breathing cold air up through the cracks. Notebook 2 contained measurements. My father had mapped as much as he could from the surface using rope and weighted line, and the echoes of stones dropped into darkness. He'd estimated 3 main galleries running the length of the ridge. He'd found 2 places where cold air rose consistently, and he'd found 1 place where he could hear water running underground. Notebook 3 contained temperature readings, hundreds of them, taken at different cracks, different times of day, different seasons. And they were all the same, 54 degrees Fahrenheit, every reading, summer and winter, drought and flood. The air coming out of the earth was always 54 degrees. I set the notebook down. I looked at the candle flame. I thought about what that meant. 54 degrees is cold in summer. It's warm in winter. It's the temperature of deep earth that doesn't care what the sky is doing. It's the temperature of stone that's been the same temperature for longer than this country has existed. And my father had found it, had measured it, had understood what it meant. Notebook 4 contained a diagram. It was crude. My father was no artist, but it was clear enough. It showed the spring house, the small stone building built into the hillside. And it showed something else. The spring house wasn't just a building, it was built directly over one of the cold air vents. The air rising out of the earth passed through the stone structure continuously, naturally, without any need for ice or machinery or anything except the patient breath of the ground. A natural refrigerator, a cold storage that would work forever and cost nothing and never break down. I sat back in my chair. The candle flickered. Outside, I could hear the wind moving through the cedars, and under that, if I listened carefully, I could hear the sound of the ridge settling, the small creaks and groans of stone adjusting itself in the dark. My father hadn't been crazy. He'd been smart, smarter than anyone in Willow Bend. Smarter than Thaddeus Brennan with his dairy and his bank building and his $50 offers. He'd seen something everyone else had walked past without noticing. He'd listened when everyone else was talking. And he'd spent 13 years learning the language of the earth so that someday someone who came after him would know what to do with it. I looked at the last page of Notebook 4. There was a single line, written there underlined twice. If Rose is reading this, tell her the rest is hidden. She'll have to earn it the way I did, by listening. I closed the notebook. I sat in the quiet farmhouse with the candle burning and the fire ticking in the stove. And I understood there were 5 notebooks in the box. My father had written 14. The other 9 were somewhere else, hidden, waiting. And I was going to have to find them. I spent the next morning searching the house. I pulled up loose floorboards. I checked the chimney. I climbed into the loft and went through every dusty corner. I found nothing. The locked door in the back room kept catching my eye. I tried it a dozen times and it wouldn't budge. The lock was old and rusted and I didn't have a key. I thought about breaking it down. I had an axe I'd found in the barn. But something stopped me. If my father had locked that door, he'd locked it for a reason. And if he'd hidden the rest of the notebooks, he wouldn't have put them somewhere I could find by breaking things. He'd put them somewhere I could find by listening. I went outside. It was mid-morning and the sun was warm and the sky was the deep blue it only gets in March when winter is finally losing its grip. I walked down to the spring house. It was built into the hillside stone walls, fitted tight, a heavy plank door with iron hinges. The door was closed but not locked. I pulled it open. Cold air rolled out like water. I stepped inside. The spring house was maybe 10 feet square. Stone floor, stone walls, no windows. There was a wooden shelf along one wall and some empty crates stacked in the corner. At the back of the room, there was a second door. This one was locked, and I didn't have a key for this one either. I stood in the cold dimness and I looked at that door. I put my hand flat against the wood. It was thick, old, solid. Behind it, I could hear something, not loud, just a whisper. The sound of air moving, the sound of something vast and patient breathing in the dark. I closed my eyes, I listened, and I heard my father's voice again, as clear as if he were standing beside me. You'll need the compass, not for finding direction, for finding depth. I took the compass out of my pocket, I opened it, the needle swung and steadied, pointing north. I turned slowly in the small stone room, watching the needle. It stayed steady, north, always north, except when I stood facing the locked door. Then the needle trembled, just slightly, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I knelt in the stone room, watching the needle. It stayed steady, north, always north, except when I stood facing the locked door. Then the needle trembled, just slightly, just enough to notice if you were paying attention. I knelt down, I held the compass close to the base of the door. The needle swung wildly, spinning, unable to settle. There was metal behind that door, a lot of it, enough to pull the needle off true. I stood up, I looked at the door again, and I understood. My father hadn't hidden the key. He'd hidden it in plain sight. Somewhere in this spring house close to metal there was a key. I started searching. I checked the shelves, I checked the crates. I ran my hands along the stone walls, feeling for loose rocks, hidden niches. Nothing. I stood in the center of the room and I turned in a slow circle, looking at everything, trying to see what my father had seen. The floor was stone, fitted pieces of limestone laid flat, except for one piece near the back wall. That piece wasn't quite level with the others. It stuck up maybe half an inch. I knelt beside it. I put my fingers in the crack and I pulled. The stone lifted. Under it was a space about 6 inches deep, and in that space was an iron key. I picked it up. It was heavy and cold, and it fit my hand like it had been waiting there for me. I stood up. I walked to the locked door. I put the key in the lock. It turned. The door opened and cold air poured out, and I stood on the threshold looking down into darkness. There were stone steps, narrow, steep, leading down into the earth. I didn't have a lantern. I didn't have rope. I didn't have anything except a candle and my father's compass and the 5 notebooks I'd already read. I should have gone back to the house. I should have waited. I should have been careful. But I wasn't careful. I was 18 years old and I'd spent my whole life being told what I couldn't do, and I was standing at the top of a staircase my father had built, leading down into a place nobody else in the county knew existed. I lit the candle. I started down. The steps were carved into the limestone, 20 of them, maybe 25. I counted as I went, but I lost track halfway down because the darkness was so complete that the candle flame seemed like the only light that had ever existed. At the bottom there was a passage, low ceiling, narrow walls. The sound of my breathing echoed back at me, doubled. I walked forward. The passage opened into a chamber about the size of the farmhouse above. The walls were limestone, pale and smooth, carved by water over thousands of years. The floor was level, and the air was cold, that same 54-degree cold I'd felt coming up through the cracks. In the center of the chamber there was a wooden table. On the table were 9 notebooks. I set the candle down. My hands were shaking. I opened the first notebook. It was number 6 in the series. The entry was dated 1915. I found the main chamber. It's 40 feet below the spring house. The air here is perfect. 54 degrees, 60% humidity, no variation. I could store anything here. Cheese, butter, apples, medicine, anything that needs cold. This chamber could hold more than any ice house in 3 counties, and it will work forever. The earth made this. I just found it. I sat down on the cold stone floor. I pulled all 9 notebooks into my lap, and I read. I read about how my father had spent 5 years excavating that staircase, moving one stone at a time, working alone because he couldn't tell anyone what he was doing. I read about how he'd built the shelves and the ventilation system and the second door to control the temperature. I read about his plans, how he wanted to turn this chamber into commercial cold storage, how he'd calculated the costs and the potential income, how he'd mapped the other galleries and found even larger chambers deeper in the cave system. And I read about why he'd stopped, why he'd never built the business he'd planned. It was in Notebook 12, an entry from 1921. Heard voices in the deep passage today. Went down to investigate, found evidence of theft. Someone has been taking the quartz formations from the East Gallery. I don't know who. I don't know how they found the entrance, but they've taken hundreds of dollars worth of minerals. I've sealed that passage, moved everything valuable to the chamber under the spring house. I can't risk telling anyone about this place now, not until I know who to trust. I closed the notebook. I sat in the cold darkness with the candle burning down, and I thought about my father alone on this ridge, trying to protect something nobody else could see the value of. And I thought about who might have been stealing from him. I thought about Thaddeus Brennan and his offers to pay the land. I thought about the locked door and the hidden key, and the 9 notebooks my father had left down here instead of up in the house. He'd hidden them because he didn't trust that they'd be safe anywhere else. He'd hidden them because he knew someone was watching, someone was waiting, someone wanted this land for reasons that had nothing to do with farming. I gathered the notebooks, I climbed back up the stone stairs, I locked the door behind me, and I put the key back under the loose stone. Then I walked back to the farmhouse as the sun was setting, and I made myself dinner over the fire, more cornmeal mush, more wild onions, and I sat at the plank table with all 14 notebooks spread in front of me. And I made a decision. I was going to do what my father had planned to do. I was going to turn that chamber into cold storage. I was going to build a business on this ridge. And I was going to prove to every man who'd laughed in that lawyer's office that they'd been wrong. But I couldn't do it alone. I knew that. I needed help. I needed someone who knew this land. Someone my father had trusted. I needed to find Elijah Freeman. I found him 2 days later working in a field 3 miles south of my father's property. He was an old man, 68, Mr. Vance had said. He looked older. His hair was white and his back was bent, and his hands on the plow handles looked like they were made of the same leather as the reins. But when he saw me walking across his field, he stopped, he took off his hat, and he waited. I stopped about 10 feet from him, close enough to talk, far enough to run if I needed to. Mr. Freeman, I said. Miss Caldwell. His voice was deep and rough, like a file taken to old wood. I've read my father's notebooks. Have you now? All 14 of them. Something changed in his face, not much, just a tightening around the eyes, like he'd been waiting to hear that. Found them quick, he said. He left good directions, if you knew how to listen. Elijah Freeman looked at me for a long moment, then he smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. Your father said you'd come, he said. Said you had his patience. Did he? Said if you made it to the notebooks, you were ready for the rest. The rest of what? Elijah set down the plow handles. He walked toward me slowly, like a man who knows his knees hurt and doesn't care to hide it. He stopped a few feet away. The rest of the truth, he said. He told me while we walked back to the ridge. Told me the whole story, and it was bigger than I'd imagined. My father and Elijah Freeman had bought the land together in 1887, not as partners on paper. Missouri law in 1887 didn't look kindly on black men owning property, especially not in partnership with white men. So they'd done it the way things had to be done. My father's name on the deed. A handshake and a promise between them. They had worked the land together for 10 years, farmed it, failed at farming it, then started exploring what was underneath it. Your father was the one who had the idea, Elijah said as we climbed the ridge. He kept saying there was something wrong with the ground. Said it was too cold in summer and too warm in winter, said the earth was breathing. And you believed him. I thought he was crazy. Elijah laughed, a short sound without much humor in it. But I'd seen crazy before, and your father wasn't it. He was curious, and curious men find things other people miss. They'd found the cave entrance in 1888, started exploring, started mapping, and they'd realized what they had. Problem was, Elijah said we couldn't tell anyone because if we told anyone, two things would happen. One, someone would try to take it from us, and two, I'd be the first one they'd take it from. Black men laying claim to valuable land. In 1888, I'd have been run out of the county if I was lucky, worse if I wasn't. So they'd kept it secret. For 35 years, they'd kept it secret, working together, planning together, waiting for the right time to turn it into something that could last. Your father put my name on a new deed in 1920, Elijah said. Legal partnership, 50-50, signed by both of us and witnessed by a lawyer in Springfield. Mr. Vance didn't mention that. Mr. Vance doesn't know. The courthouse in Springfield burned in 1922, lost half the records, including ours. We'd reached the farmhouse by then. Elijah stood in the clearing and looked around slowly like he was seeing ghosts. I told your father to fight it, he said. Told him to get new papers drawn up, but he said no. Said it didn't matter. Said when the time came, the right person would know what to do. And who was the right person? Elijah looked at me. You, he said. We sat on the porch steps as the sun went down, and he told me the rest. About the legal requirements. About how Missouri law wouldn't let a woman under 21 own property outright without a male co-trustee. About how my father had named Elijah in the will, specifically because he knew Thaddeus Brennan would object. He wanted you to have a choice, Elijah said. Could take Brennan's money and walk away, could refuse me as co-trustee and let Brennan buy the land cheap. Or you could partner with me, prove you're your father's daughter, and build what he couldn't. Why couldn't he build it? Elijah was quiet for a long time. Because he got sick, he said finally. Heart problems started in 1921, got worse. By 1922, he could barely walk from here to the spring house without having to sit down. I thought about the split wood stacked under the tarp, about the locked door and the hidden notebooks, about my father alone on this ridge in winter cutting firewood for a daughter he hadn't seen in 2 years. He died in that cave, didn't he? I said. Elijah nodded. Went down to check something. Seal a passage, I think. Didn't come back up. I found him 3 days later. You knew about the cave all along. I helped dig those stairs, cut half those stones myself. I looked at him, at this old black man who'd kept my father's secret for 35 years, who'd worked beside him and trusted him and buried him and said nothing when the whole county called him a fool. Mr. Freeman, I said, I'll partner with you, but I need to know something first. Ask it. Do you believe in what my father was trying to build? I believe, Elijah said slowly, that your father spent 35 years listening to the earth, and I believe the earth told him something true. And I believe if you're patient enough and stubborn enough, you can build something on this ridge that'll still be here long after both of us are gone. He stood up, his knees cracked. But I'm not giving you anything for free, he said. Your father earned this knowledge over 13 years. You'll earn it too, or you'll sell to Brennan like he expects. How do I earn it? You stay, Elijah said. You work, you prove you've got the patience your father had. 30 days, you make it 30 days on this ridge, doing the work, living the way he lived. Then I'll teach you what he taught me. You quit before that, I sell my half to Brennan and you get nothing. I thought about my $11, about the cold farmhouse and the hard work ahead, and the men in town who were waiting for me to fail. Deal, I said. Elijah smiled. Start tomorrow, he said. Sunrise, I'll bring tools. He started walking back down the ridge. I watched him go until he disappeared into the cedars. Then I went inside and I built up the fire and I read my father's notebooks again by candlelight. And I tried not to think about what would happen if I failed. The 30 days were the hardest of my life. Elijah worked me from sunrise to sunset. We hauled water from the creek, we repaired the roof, we cleared brush and patched walls, and rebuilt the worst of the fence line around the property. He didn't go easy on me because I was young, or because I was a woman, or because my father had just died. He worked beside me and he expected me to keep pace, and when I couldn't keep pace, he waited without comment until I caught up. My hands blistered, my shoulders ached, I lost weight I didn't have to lose. At night, I'd collapse on the rope bed with my boots still on and sleep without dreaming and wake before dawn to do it again. But I didn't quit. On the 5th day, I asked him about the notebooks, about what my father had been trying to build. "You'll learn that when you've earned it," was all he said. On the 10th day, a woman came up the ridge. She was in her middle 20s, dark hair, pulled back practical dress, worn boots. She was carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "You're Silas's daughter," she said. "I am. I'm Beatrice Thornton. My father was Samuel Thornton. He ran the cheese house in West Plains." She set the basket on the porch steps. Inside was bread and butter and a jar of apple preserves. "Your father helped mine when times were hard," she said. "I'm repaying the debt." I looked at the food. I hadn't had real bread in 10 days. My stomach clenched just looking at it. "Thank you," I said. "I heard you're trying to make something of this place." "I'm trying." Beatrice looked around at the ridge, at the broken limestone and the twisted cedars. Then she looked back at me. "If you need help," she said, "I know cold storage, I know cheese aging, and I know my father owed your father more than bread. I don't have money to pay anyone. I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for a chance to clear a debt." I looked at her, at the directness in her eyes, at the way she stood, weight balanced, like she'd decided something and wasn't going to be moved from it. "Why?" I said. "Because my father told me something before he died. He told me your father forgave him for something he'd done, something bad, and he said that forgiveness saved his life, and I want to know what kind of man forgives like that." I didn't know what she meant, but I knew I needed help, and I knew my father must have trusted her father, or Beatrice wouldn't be standing here. "Come back on Sunday," I said. "I'll know more by then." She nodded and walked back down the ridge. That night I asked Elijah about Samuel Thornton. We were sitting on the porch in the dark, too tired to go inside. Elijah was quiet for a long time. "Samuel was one of the men who stole from your father," he said finally. I sat up straight. "Stole what?" "Minerals, quartz formations from the deep gallery. Samuel and 2 others found a way into the cave through a sinkhole on the north slope. They didn't know your father knew about that entrance. They took maybe $400 worth of minerals over 2 years. And my father forgave them." "He did more than forgive them. He told them the minerals they'd stolen were worthless once exposed to air," which was true. The crystals broke down in sunlight, turned to dust. But he also told them they could keep what they'd already taken, said the earth had given it up and he wouldn't ask for it back. "Why?" "Because your father understood something about theft. He understood that men who steal usually steal because they're desperate. And desperate men, if you give them a second chance, sometimes become loyal men." I thought about that, about my father's patience extending even to thieves. "Samuel Thornton died of guilt anyway," Elijah said. "Couldn't live with what he'd done even after forgiveness. That's why Beatrice is here. She's trying to finish what her father couldn't." "Should I trust her?" "Your father did. That's enough for me." On the 15th day, Elijah took me down into the cave. We went through the spring house, down the stone stairs, into the chamber where I'd found the notebooks. He showed me the ventilation system my father had built, the channels cut into the limestone to direct cold air, the stone shelves designed to hold cheese wheels, the second chamber roughed out but never finished that could double the storage capacity. "Your father mapped 3 main galleries," Elijah said. "This is the first. The second runs east under the ridge. The third runs deeper, but we never explored all of it. Too dangerous without proper equipment." What was he planning to do with all this commercial cold storage, rent space to dairies and orchards and anyone who needed reliable cold. Your father calculated he could store 2,000 pounds of product in this chamber alone, more if we finished the second chamber. I looked around at the limestone walls, at the cold air moving past my face, at the system my father had built and never got to use. Why didn't he do it? I asked. Because he got sick before he could raise the capital, and because I couldn't raise it for him. Black man in Missouri trying to get a business loan might as well ask for the moon. But I'm not black. Elijah looked at me. No, he said, you're not. You're a young woman who owns property in partnership with a black man, which is different, but not by much. I understood what he was saying. I understood the weight of it. So we're going to fail, I said. I didn't say that. Elijah smiled. I said it's going to be harder than it should be. But your father didn't spend 13 years building this place because he thought it would be easy. He did it because he knew it was possible. On the 23rd day, Beatrice came back. She brought more food and she brought tools, a good saw, hammer, nails that didn't bend when you hit them. I want to help, she said. I told her about the cave, about my father's plan, about the partnership with Elijah and the 30-day test, and the fact that Thaddeus Brennan was waiting for me to fail so he could buy the land cheap. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my father stole from yours. Did Elijah tell you that he did? My father stole because he was desperate and stupid and he thought nobody would notice. And your father forgave him anyway, told him the earth gives up what it's ready to give up, and taking more than that is just greed. Elijah told me. What Elijah didn't tell you, Beatrice said, is that my father left me a letter before he died. In that letter, he told me about this cave, about what your father was trying to build. And he told me that if I ever had the chance to make it right, I should take it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to me. This is the chance, she said. I unfolded the paper. It was a receipt for $240 paid by Samuel Thornton to Silas Caldwell in 1920, and at the bottom in my father's handwriting, debt-cleared partnership offered. I looked at Beatrice. So your father tried to pay him back? He did, and your father took the money, then told him he could be a partner instead of a thief if he wanted. My father was too ashamed to accept. But he kept the receipt, kept it because he wanted me to know that your father was a better man than he was. I folded the receipt carefully and gave it back to her. Keep it, Beatrice said. You might need it. Proof that your father was in business with my father. Proof that he was trying to build something real. On the 30th day, Elijah came up the ridge at sunrise. I was already awake, already working. I had been hauling water since before dawn. He watched me for a minute, then he said, you made it. I did. You ready to learn the rest? I am. He smiled. Good, because we've got 3 months to build a business before Thaddeus Brennan finds a way to take this land from under us, and I'm not giving him the satisfaction. That night we sat on the porch, me, Elijah, and Beatrice, and we made plans, real plans, how to finish the second chamber, how to find clients, how to price storage, how to handle Brennan when he inevitably came back with another offer or another threat. And for the first time since I'd arrived on this ridge, I felt like I wasn't alone. I felt like I was part of something my father had started, something that might actually work. But I also felt something else, a prickling at the back of my neck, the feeling you get when you know someone's watching you and you can't see them. I looked down the ridge toward the valley. The sun had set and the darkness was rising like water, and somewhere down there in the cedar breaks I thought I saw movement. Just for a second, just a shape against the deeper dark. Then it was gone. What is it? Beatrice asked. Nothing, I said. But it wasn't nothing. I'd been on this ridge long enough now to know when something was wrong. And something was wrong. Someone was watching us. Someone knew what we were planning. And I had a feeling I knew who it was. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in late April, 3 weeks after I'd passed Elijah's test. I was in the second chamber, the one my father had roughed out but never finished measuring the walls for shelving. Beatrice was with me sketching plans by lantern light. Elijah had gone to West Plains to talk to potential clients' dairies that might need cold storage come summer. The air in the cave was always 54 degrees and always still except when it wasn't. And that morning it wasn't. There was a draft coming from somewhere it shouldn't be coming from. A whisper of warmer air mixing with the cold. Beatrice felt it too. She looked up from her sketching. Did you open something? No. We followed the draft. It led us to the passage that connected to the East Gallery, the one my father had sealed after the theft. The passage where Samuel Thornton and his partners had stolen quartz formations worth $400. The seal was broken. Someone had pried away the stones my father had mortared into place. Recently, the exposed limestone behind the seal was still dry, not yet darkened by the cave's moisture. I knelt and examined the stones. They'd been moved carefully, quietly by someone who knew what they were doing, and then placed back loosely so that from a distance the seal looked intact. Someone's been down here, Beatrice said quietly, in the last few days. Who knows about this cave besides us? That was the question, wasn't it? My father and Elijah had kept it secret for 35 years. I told no one except Beatrice, which meant either someone had followed us down or someone had known about it all along. I thought about the shape I'd seen moving in the cedar breaks that night, the feeling of being watched. We need to tell Elijah, I said. We climbed back up to the surface. The spring sunshine felt too bright after the cave darkness. I locked the springhouse door and we walked quickly back to the farmhouse. That's when we saw the cattle. 15 head of them, maybe 20, standing in what used to be my father's garden plot. They'd trampled the fence I'd spent 2 weeks repairing. They'd churned the soil to mud. And they were wearing Thaddeus Brennan's brand. I stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at them and felt something cold settle in my stomach that had nothing to do with cave air. This isn't an accident, Beatrice said. No. What are you going to do? I thought about walking down to Brennan's property and demanding he move his cattle. I thought about going to the sheriff. I thought about all the ways that would end with me being told that cattle wander and fences fail and young women shouldn't own land they can't protect. I'm going to fix the fence, I said. Again, we worked until sunset, driving posts and stringing wire. The cattle watched us with their flatting, curious eyes. When we were done, I walked them off the property myself, shouting and waving my arms until they ambled through the gap in the fence line and down toward Brennan's pasture. As I was closing the gap, I saw him. Colton Tench, Brennan's foreman, he was standing at the tree line about 100 yards away watching. When he saw me looking, he didn't hide. He just touched the brim of his hat, a mock salute, and walked away. Elijah came back that evening with good news and bad news. The good news was he'd found 3 dairies interested in storage. Small operations family run desperate for reliable cold now that summer was coming and the ice houses from last winter were already running low. The bad news was the courthouse. Brennan filed a challenge to your father's will, Elijah said. We were sitting at the plank table, a single candle between us. Claims the property was never fully paid for. Says he's got a deed from 1885 showing your father still owed $200 on the purchase. That's 40 years ago. Doesn't matter. If he can prove it, the county can seize the land for unpaid debt and auction it. And Brennan will be first in line to buy. Can he prove it? I don't know. Your father kept records, but a lot of them burned in the Springfield courthouse fire. If Brennan's got a deal we don't have proof against, we're in trouble. Beatrice leaned forward. When's the hearing? October. Judge Bennett's docket is full until then. October. I did the math in my head. That's 6 months. 6 months to prove the land has value, Elijah said. 6 months to make enough money that the judge can't ignore what we're building. And 6 months to find proof that your father paid in full. And if we can't find proof, Elijah's face was grim in the candlelight, then we lose everything. We started building the next morning, not just shelves now, we were building a business. Beatrice brought her father's old carpentry tools and her own knowledge of cheese aging. Elijah brought muscle and experience and a patience I was still learning. I brought my father's notebooks and a stubbornness that surprised even me. The work was harder than the 30-day test had been. We were working underground now, in chambers where the air was thin and the darkness was absolute beyond our lantern light. We hauled lumber down the stone stairs, one board at a time. We built shelving systems with slats spaced exactly right to let the cold air circulate. We sealed cracks and reinforced walls and installed the ventilation channels my father had designed but never completed. Every night I fell into bed too exhausted to think. Every morning I woke up and did it again. The dairies came in mid-May to see the facility. 3 of them, small operations like Elijah had said. Families who'd been making cheese for generations and were watching their products spoil in. I gave them the tour myself, showed them the chambers, explained the air system, the constant temperature, the humidity control. I showed them my father's notebooks, the 13 years of temperature readings that proved this wasn't chance, this was science. They were skeptical, all 3 of them. I could see it in their faces. A girl barely old enough to vote trying to sell them on cold storage in a hole in the ground. But then Beatrice spoke up. She talked about cheese aging, about the specific conditions needed for proper culture development, about how temperature fluctuations of even 5 degrees could ruin a wheel worth $3. She talked like someone who'd spent her whole life around cheese, which she had. And Elijah talked about reliability, about how their current ice houses depended on winter freeze and summer discipline, and how one warm winter or one hot summer could wipe out their entire inventory. This chamber, he said, standing in the center of the first gallery with the cold air moving around us, has been 54 degrees for 10,000 years. It'll be 54 degrees for 10,000 more. That's reliability. By the end of the tour, 2 of the 3 dairies agreed to a trial. 100 pounds of green cheese each, stored for 60 days, aging fee paid up front. It wasn't much, but it was a start. We loaded the cheese the first week of June. Beatrice supervised the placement, making sure each wheel had proper air circulation. I recorded everything in a new notebook: weight, dairy, name date, received, expected pickup date. 200 pounds of cheese, $400 worth of product. If we succeeded, we'd make $30 in storage fees. If we failed, we'd owe $400 we didn't have. The pressure of it kept me awake at night. June turned hot. The kind of hot that makes the air shimmer and the limestone ridge feel like it's baking from below. I checked the chamber temperature 3 times a day. 54 degrees, always 54 degrees. The cheese aged beautifully. Beatrice cut into a wheel at the 30-day mark to check progress. The interior was pale gold, firm, slightly crumbly at the edge. It tasted like grass and stone and patience. "This is better than anything my father produced," she said quietly. We were in the chamber, just the 2 of us. Elijah was up top, repairing the barn roof. The lantern light made shadows on the limestone walls, and the cold air made our breath visible. "Better than a commercial ice house?" I asked. "Better than anything I've seen." I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized I was holding tight. "We might actually do this," I said. Beatrice smiled. "We might." That's when we heard the sound, a crack sharp and clear, echoing down the stone stairs. We looked at each other, then we ran. We came up through the spring house into chaos. The barn wasn't just damaged, it was destroyed. The roof had collapsed completely, taking half the walls with it. And standing in the wreckage, looking satisfied, was Colton Tench. Elijah was on the ground, not unconscious but hurt. He was holding his arm at an angle that made my stomach turn. I ran to him like, "What happened?" "A roof collapsed." His voice was tight with pain. "Oh, it wasn't an accident." Colton was already walking away back toward the tree line. He didn't run, he didn't hurry. He just walked casual as anything, like he'd come up to check on a fence line and found it satisfactory. "Tench," I shouted. He stopped, turned, looked at me with eyes that had no expression in them at all. "Dangerous ridge you got here, Miss Caldwell," he said. "Old buildings collapse all the time. Man could get hurt. You did this?" I didn't do nothing but walk past an old barn that fell down. He smiled. It was not a good smile. "Maybe you should think about selling before something worse happens." He walked away. I wanted to go after him. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to do something, anything that would wipe that smile off his face. But Elijah needed a doctor, and I needed to be smart. Beatrice and I got Elijah down to town. His arm was broken in two places. The doctor, an old man named Whitmore who had known my father, set it and put it in a cast and told Elijah he couldn't do heavy work for 6 weeks minimum. 6 weeks, Elijah said when we got back to the ridge. "We don't have 6 weeks. The cheese comes out in 4 weeks, and we've got 3 more dairies wanting to sign on if this batch works." "We'll manage," I said. "You can't do this alone." "I'm not alone. I have Beatrice." Beatrice nodded. "We'll manage." But managing was harder than I'd admitted. The barn collapse meant we lost our main storage for tools and lumber. We had to move everything into the farmhouse, which was already cramped. And without Elijah's strength, tasks that had taken an hour took 3. The secondary's cheese was ready for pickup in early July. When they came to collect it, they brought friends. Word was spreading. The girl on the ridge had cold storage that worked. Reliable cold, consistent cold. The kind of cold that didn't depend on winter ice or summer luck. We made our $30, then we made 60 more when 2 new dairies signed on. But the money went to replacing tools lost in the barn collapse, and to buying lumber to build a temporary shelter, and to paying the doctor for Elijah's arm. By mid-July, we were barely breaking even, and the drought was starting. It started slow. A dry June, a hot July, the kind of weather that makes farmers watch the sky and pray for rain that doesn't come. The creek started running low. The grass in the valley turned brown, and the commercial ice houses in Springfield and West Plains started running out of ice. I read about it in the newspaper Elijah brought up from town. 3 ice houses had already closed for the season. Their ice cut from ponds the previous winter and stored in sawdust had melted faster than anyone predicted. The summer was too hot. The ice had been cut from too mild a winter. There wasn't enough of it, and there wasn't any more coming until next February. "This is what your father was preparing for," Elijah said. He was sitting on the porch, his arms still in the cast, watching me read. He knew this would happen eventually. Hot summer, mild winter, ice houses fail, and when they fail, anyone who needs cold storage has nowhere to turn. Except us. Except us. The dairies started coming in August. First a trickle, then a flood. Not just the small family operations, now the big ones too. The ones that supplied cheese to stores in Springfield and Joplin and St. Louis. The ones that had commercial ice houses that weren't working anymore. They were desperate. I could see it in their faces. Milk was souring before it could be processed. Butter was going rancid. Cheese was spoiling on the shelves. They were losing hundreds of dollars a day. And they were coming to me. We filled the first chamber, then the second. Then Beatrice and I spent 3 days opening up a third chamber my father had marked in his notebooks but never excavated. We worked by lantern light, moving stones and clearing passages until we had enough space for another 500 pounds. The money started coming in. Real money. More money than I'd ever seen. $50 a week, then 70, then 100. By late August, we had 15 clients. By early September, we had 23. And then Thaddeus Brennan came. He came on a Thursday afternoon driving his truck up the ridge like he owned it. Colton Tench was with him, so were 2 other men I didn't recognize. I was at the spring house when they arrived. Beatrice was inside with me, checking inventory. We heard the truck and we came out. Brennan got out slowly. He was a big man and he knew how to use the size. He stood next to the truck and looked around at the ridge like he was calculating what it was worth. "Miss Caldwell?" he said. "Mr. Brennan?" Heard you're doing good business. We're managing. That's what I hear. 23 clients, $150 a week. Not bad for a girl and a Negro and a barn that collapsed. I didn't say anything. I knew where this was going. I've got a problem, Brennan said. My dairy ships to St. Louis. Big contracts, good money, but my ice house is empty and my cheese room is running at 71 degrees. I'm losing product, I'm losing money, and I'm losing reputation. That sounds like your problem. It is my problem, which is why I'm here to solve it. He smiled. It was the same smile Colton had given me. I need cold storage, 500 pounds, starting today. We're full. Then make room. I can't make room. Every inch of space is contracted. Then break a contract. I'll pay double, triple. I looked at him, at the way he stood, at the men behind him, at Colton Tench leaning against the truck bed watching. No, I said. The smile disappeared. No. We honor our contracts. First come, first served. If you want space, you can join the waiting list like everyone else. I'm not waiting in line for some girl's underground playhouse. Then you're not storing here. Brennan took a step forward, not threatening exactly, but close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look at him. You're making a mistake, Miss Caldwell. Maybe. I'm offering you money, good money, more money than you'll make in 6 months. And I'm offering you the waiting list. He stared at me for a long moment, then he turned and walked back to his truck. He said something to Colton I couldn't hear. Colton nodded. They got in the truck and drove away. Beatrice came to stand beside me. That was brave, she said. That was stupid. Maybe both. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay on the rope bed and listened to the wind in the cedars and thought about what I'd done. I turned down Thaddeus Brennan, the richest man in the county, the man who owned half the valley and wanted the other half, the man who'd already destroyed my barn and filed a challenge to my father's will and put his foreman on me like a hunting dog. And I told him no. I got up and lit a candle and read my father's notebooks again, looking for guidance, looking for something he'd written that would tell me I'd made the right choice. I found it in notebook 11, dated 1920. A man came today and offered me $200 for the ridge. Said he wanted the timber. I told him no. He got angry, said I was a fool to turn down good money for worthless land. I told him the land wasn't worthless. I told him it was patient. And patience, I told him, isn't for sale. I closed the notebook, I blew out the candle, and I went back to bed, but I didn't sleep. The sabotage happened 3 days later. I found it in the morning when I went down to check temperatures. The seal on the ventilation channel in the second chamber had been broken, not damaged, broken. Deliberately, someone had pried off the stone cover and left it hanging open. Warm air was pouring in. The temperature in the chamber had risen from 54 degrees to 62. I ran up the stairs through the spring house across the clearing to where Elijah and Beatrice were working on the new shelter. The chamber, I said. I was breathing hard. Someone broke the seal. We went down together, all three of us. The damage was worse than I thought. The chamber had been at 62 degrees for hours, maybe longer. The cheese wheels on the lower shelves were already showing signs of stress. Surface moisture, temperature shock. How much? Elijah asked. 200 pounds, Beatrice said quietly, but maybe more. 200 pounds, 8 wheels, 3 different dairies, worth about $400. I sat down on the stone floor. I put my head in my hands. And for the first time since I'd come to this ridge, I wanted to cry. But I didn't cry. I got angry. Who did this? Beatrice asked. The Tench, I said. Had to be. He knows about the cave. He's been watching us. How does he know? That was the question I'd been avoiding. How did Colton Tench know about the chambers? How did he know about the ventilation system? How did he know exactly where to break the seal to cause maximum damage? And then I remembered. The broken seal on the east gallery passage, the one we'd found in April. Someone had been down here before. Someone had been exploring. Someone had been learning the cave system. He's been coming down here, I said, for months, maybe longer. He knows this place as well as we do. Then we're not safe, Beatrice said. If he can get in whenever he wants. We change the locks, Elijah said. We seal every entrance except the one we use. And we take turns watching. We spent the rest of the day doing damage control. We sealed the ventilation breach. We moved the compromised cheese to the coldest part of the first chamber, hoping we could salvage it. We changed the lock on the spring house door, and I put the only key on a chain around my neck. But the damage was done. 2 of the 3 dairies whose cheese had been affected refused to pay storage fees, said we'd failed to maintain proper conditions, said they couldn't trust us with their product anymore. We lost $60. More importantly, we lost reputation. Word spread. The girl on the ridge couldn't protect her storage. Someone had sabotaged it. Someone had gotten in. If they could do it once, they could do it again. 3 dairies pulled their contracts. 2 more asked for reduced fees in exchange for accepting the risk. By the end of the week, we'd lost nearly a quarter of our clients. I sat on the porch that evening with Elijah and Beatrice and watched the sun go down and tried to figure out what to do next. We can't survive another sabotage, Elijah said. His arm was still in the cast. He looked older than he had 2 months ago. 1 more incident and we're finished. So we guard it, I said. 24 hours. Someone's always down there. For how long? Until October? That's 2 more months, if that's what it takes. Beatrice shook her head. Rose, we can't. We're already exhausted. We're barely keeping up with the work we have. If we add guard duty on top of it, then we don't sleep. We work in shifts. We do what we have to do. And what happens when one of us collapses from exhaustion? I didn't have an answer for that. We sat in silence. The evening was cooling off, but it was still warm, the kind of warm that promised another hot day tomorrow. The drought wasn't breaking, the ice houses weren't coming back, the dairies were still desperate for cold storage. We were the only option in 3 counties and we were losing. There has to be another way, I said finally, like what Beatrice asked. Like finding proof that Brennan's deed is fake, like finding the records my father kept, like... I stopped. I sat up straight. What? Elijah said. My father's records, where did he keep them? In the house, I assume. In those notebooks you found. No, the notebooks are observations, temperature readings, cave measurements, but he had to have kept business records, purchase receipts, payment records, proof that he paid for this land in full. The Springfield courthouse burned, Elijah said. Those records are gone. But my father would have kept copies. He was too careful not to. Then where are they? I thought about the locked room in the back of the farmhouse. The one I still hadn't opened, the one I'd been avoiding because I didn't have a key and I didn't want to break down my father's door. I think I know, I said. We broke the lock that night. I felt guilty about it, felt like I was violating something my father had wanted protected. But we needed those records, we needed proof. The room was small, smaller than I'd expected. There was a desk, a chair, a filing cabinet, and a trunk. The filing cabinet was locked. The trunk was not. Inside the trunk were papers, hundreds of them, letters, receipts, contracts, deeds, my father's entire business life organized in neat bundles tied with string labeled by year. We spread them on the floor and went through them by lantern light. Elijah read through the correspondence. Beatrice took the contracts. I took the receipts. It took 3 hours, but I found it. A receipt dated November 1885 for $240, paid by Silas Caldwell to the Douglas County Land Office for the purchase of 48 acres on Ashner's Ridge. Full payment, final sale, no outstanding debt, and at the bottom stamped in faded ink, paid in full, County Clerk Albert Morrison. I held the receipt up to the lantern light. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but the ink was clear. This was it. This was proof. We've got him, I said. Elijah took the receipt carefully. He read it twice, then he smiled. Your father saved this for 39 years, he said. Saved it because he knew someday someone would challenge him, knew someday someone would try to take this land. And he was ready. He was always ready. We put the receipt in a safe place. Beatrice took it home with her where Brennan couldn't get to it. And we went to bed that night feeling like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. But I should have known it wasn't that simple. I should have known Thaddeus Brennan didn't get rich by being easy to beat. I should have known he'd have one more play. The second sabotage happened a week later, not in the chambers this time at the source. Someone had poisoned the spring. I found it when I went to collect water for morning coffee. The spring pool was clouded, milky white, and floating on the surface were 3 dead rabbits. I didn't touch the water. I went straight to Elijah. The spring's poisoned. Poisoned how? I don't know, but it's bad. Dead animals, white residue. Elijah came to look. He knelt at the edge of the spring and studied the water without touching it. Lime powder, he said. Someone dumped lime powder in the spring, enough to kill anything that drinks it and make the water unusable for weeks. Can we fix it? We can drain it, clean it, let fresh water flow back in, but it'll take time, 3 days, maybe 4. We don't have 3 days. We don't have a choice. We spend the next 72 hours hauling water from the creek a half-mile away. We drained the spring pool and scrubbed the limestone basin and waited for clean water to flow back through the underground channels that fed it. It was brutal work, made worse by the heat, made worse by the fact that everyone knew what had happened. Someone had poisoned the Caldwell spring. Someone was trying to drive the girl off the ridge, and everyone knew who that someone was. But knowing and proving are different things, and without proof there was nothing I could do. On the third day, while we were waiting for the spring to clear, I went down into the caves alone. I told Elijah and Beatrice I was checking temperatures, but really I needed to think, needed to be in the cold dark where everything made sense. I walked through the first chamber, through the second. I stood in the cold and listened to the earth breathing and tried to figure out what my father would have done. And that's when I found it. I was in the passage between the second and third chambers, the one my father had marked in his notebooks as dangerous, unstable ceiling. I'd never explored it fully, never had reason to, but today I noticed something. A draft, coming from deeper in the passage, from a place I'd never been. I followed it. The passage narrowed, got lower. I had to duck, then crawl. The lantern light threw wild shadows on the limestone walls. And then the passage opened up into a chamber that took my breath away. It was massive, bigger than the other 3 chambers combined. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above my lantern's reach, and at the center of the chamber was a pool, dark water, still as glass, reflecting the lantern light like a mirror. I stood at the edge of that pool and held the lantern high and understood. This was what my father had been protecting. This was the chamber he'd kept secret. This was the heart of the cave system, the place where everything, all the air, all the water, all the cold, originated. This was the source. I walked around the pool. The chamber walls were smooth limestone carved by water over millennia. The temperature here was perfect, 54 degrees, the same as everywhere else in the cave. But the air felt different, cleaner, older. On the far side of the pool, I found my father's camp, a small one, just a wooden crate for a seat, a shelf carved into the limestone, and on that shelf 2 more notebooks, 13 and 14, the last ones, the ones I hadn't found anywhere else. I sat on the crate and opened notebook 13. The first entry was dated January 1922. I found it. The main chamber, the one I have been searching for 15 years. It's perfect, more perfect than I imagined. This chamber could store 10 times what the galleries can hold, could supply cold for the entire county, could run forever. I read on. My father had spent the last year of his life down here, measuring, planning, designing an expansion that would turn this cave from a small storage facility into something that could change the entire region. But he'd never told anyone, not even Elijah, because he knew what would happen if word got out. Someone would try to take it. Someone would try to control it. Someone would turn something patient and perfect into something rushed and ruined. So he'd kept it secret, and he'd written it all down, and he'd left the notebooks here, in the heart of the cave, waiting for someone patient enough to find them. Waiting for me. The last entry in notebook 14 was dated February 1922, a month before he died. I don't have much time left. The doctor says months, maybe weeks. My heart is giving out. But I'm not afraid. I've done what I needed to do. I found what the earth wanted to show me, and I've left instructions for Rose. If she finds this, if she reads this, she'll know what to do. Tell her I didn't leave her broken land. I left her a cathedral. Tell her the earth chose her. Tell her to listen. I closed the notebook. I sat in the cold dark at the edge of the underground pool and I cried. Not from sadness, from understanding. My father hadn't left me a farm. He hadn't even left me a business. He'd left me a responsibility, a trust, a living system that would outlast all of us if we protected it. And I understood what I had to do. I climbed back up to the surface. Elijah and Beatrice were waiting at the spring house. "Where have you been?" Beatrice asked. "We were worried." I found something, I said, something big. I told them about the fourth chamber, about the pool, about my father's final notebooks and his plans for expansion. "How big is it?" Elijah asked. "Big enough to store for 50 dairies, maybe 100. They were quiet for a moment, processing that. "If we expand into that chamber," Beatrice said slowly, "we won't just be a small storage facility, we'll be the only game in 3 counties. We'll be a target," Elijah said. "Brennan will come at us harder. He's already coming at us as hard as he can. And if we can't protect it," I looked at him, at this old man who'd kept my father's secret for 35 years, who'd worked beside him and trusted him and now trusted me. "Then we lose," I said. "But if we don't try, we lose anyway. At least this way, we lose big." Elijah smiled. "Your father would have said the same thing. So we're doing this. We're doing this." We started work the next day, opening access to the fourth chamber, building a proper stairway down, planning the shelving system. It would take months, maybe a year, but if we could finish it, if we could protect it, we'd have something no one could compete with. We'd have what my father had dreamed of, a cathedral in the earth, a place where patience was rewarded and rushing was punished, a place that would outlast all of us. But first, we had to survive until October. We had to survive the hearing. We had to survive Thaddeus Brennan's final play. And I had a feeling that play was coming soon. I was right. The play came on September 15th. The night before the hearing, I was alone in the farmhouse. Elijah had gone home. Beatrice was in town getting supplies. I was reading my father's notebooks by candlelight, preparing for tomorrow's court appearance. That's when I heard it, a crack, sharp, clear, coming from outside. I went to the window. At first I saw nothing. Then I saw the light, orange, flickering, growing. The spring house was on fire. I ran out the door across the clearing, my boots pounding on the dirt. The fire was already huge, flames coming through the roof, smoke pouring out the door. And standing at the tree line watching was Colton Tench. I stopped. We looked at each other across the firelight. He smiled. Then he walked away. I didn't chase him. I ran to the spring house. The door was already burning. I couldn't get in the front way, but I could get in through the cave. I ran to the back of the spring house, to the small secondary entrance my father had built for emergencies. I pulled open the hidden door and climbed down into the passage. Smoke was already filling the upper levels. I pulled my shirt over my mouth and kept going. I made it to the first chamber. The smoke was thicker here. The heat from above was radiating through the stone, but the chambers themselves were intact. The cheese was safe. The structure was holding. But Beatrice was down here. I'd forgotten. She'd come back early and gone down to check on the cheese while I was reading. "Beatrice," I shouted. My voice echoed back at me, distorted by smoke. No answer. I went deeper, into the second chamber, through the passage, to the third. The smoke was everywhere now. I could barely see, barely breathe. And then I found her, in the passage to the fourth chamber. She'd been checking the new excavation when the fire started. When she tried to come back, a support beam had collapsed across the passage. She was trapped on the wrong side, unconscious from smoke. I grabbed the beam, tried to lift it. It was too heavy, too much weight. My lungs were burning, my eyes streaming. I tried again, got it up a few inches, enough to drag Beatrice through. She was breathing, but barely. I got her over my shoulder. She was heavier than she looked, and I carried her back through the passages, through the second chamber, through the first, up the stone stairs to the secondary entrance. We emerged into cold night air. The spring house was fully engulfed now, flames reaching 30 feet high. The roof collapsed as I watched, sending up a shower of sparks. I laid Beatrice on the ground and checked her breathing. She coughed, opened her eyes, rose. I'm here, don't move. What happened? Brennan happened. She tried to sit up. I helped her. We sat together in the grass and watched the spring house burn. Everything we'd built, all the work, all the patience, going up in flames. And tomorrow was the hearing. Tomorrow we had to stand in front of Judge Bennett and prove we deserved to keep this land. Tomorrow we had to win, or we lost everything. The spring house burned until dawn. By the time the sun came up, there was nothing left but stone walls and ash. The wooden roof was gone. The door was gone. The stairs down to the chambers were scorched but intact. I stood in the ruins with Elijah and Beatrice and looked at what we'd lost. 3 months of work, our main entrance. Our storage records, the paper ones anyway, I'd kept them in a box by the door, gone. We need to go to the sheriff, Beatrice said. Her voice was hoarse from smoke. Tench did this. We all know it. And tell him what Elijah said, that we saw Tench standing at the tree line. That's not proof. That's accusation, and accusations from a girl and black man against Thaddeus Brennan's foreman won't go anywhere except back to us. So he just gets away with it. For now. I didn't say anything. I was too tired to be angry, too tired to be afraid. I just felt hollow. The hearing was at 10 o'clock. We had 4 hours to clean up, get presentable, and figure out how to convince a judge that we deserved to keep land that someone had just tried to burn us off of. We should postpone, Beatrice said. Ask for a continuance. Give us time to... No, I said. They both looked at me. If we postpone, Brennan wins. He's trying to make us look unstable, unreliable, dangerous to do business with. If we don't show up today, if we ask for more time, we're proving him right. Rose, we're not ready. We're never going to be ready, but we have what we need. We have the receipt. We have 15 diaries who'll testify we provide reliable storage. We have my father's notebooks proving he knew what he was doing. I looked at them both, and we have the truth. Elijah was quiet for a moment, then he nodded. Your father would have gone, he said. Then so do we. We cleaned up as best we could. I washed the smoke smell out of my hair in creek water. Beatrice lent me a clean dress, gray wool, simple, the kind of thing a serious businesswoman would wear. Elijah put on a suit he'd brought up from his house, dark and pressed the suit he wore to church. We looked respectable, we looked prepared. We didn't look like people who'd spend the night fighting a fire and rescuing each other from a burning building. The courthouse in Willow Bend was the same building where I'd heard my father's will read 6 months ago. Same wooden floors, same high ceilings, same windows that let in too much light and made everyone squint. The courtroom was full, not packed, but full enough that I knew word had spread. People wanted to see this, wanted to see if the Caldwell girl could hold on to her father's land, wanted to see if Thaddeus Brennan would finally get what he'd been after for 40 years. Brennan was already there. Front row, left side, Colton Tench beside him. And a lawyer, front row, Elijah made Beatrice. We had no lawyer, couldn't afford one, we were representing ourselves. Judge Bennett came in at exactly 10 o'clock. He was 70 if he was a day, white-haired and stern-faced, the kind of judge who'd seen everything twice and wasn't impressed by much. He sat down, looked around the courtroom. His eyes stopped on me for a moment, then moved on. We're here today, he said, to hear the matter of Brennan versus Caldwell regarding the disputed ownership of 48 acres on Ashness Ridge in Douglas County. Mr. Brennan has filed a challenge to the validity of the late Silas Caldwell's will, claiming outstanding debt on the property dating to 1885. Miss Caldwell is here to defend her inheritance. Mr. Brennan, your counsel may begin. The lawyer stood. His name was Harrison Webb, and his voice was smooth as oil. Your Honor, this is a simple matter of unpaid debt. In 1885, Silas Caldwell purchased 48 acres from the county land office for the sum of $480. He paid $240 at the time of purchase. The remaining $240 was to be paid within 5 years. He walked to the judge's bench and handed up a document. This is the original deed showing the partial payment and the terms of the outstanding balance. As you can see, there is no record of the remaining payment ever being made. Under Missouri law, unpaid property debt reverts to the county after 20 years. The property should have reverted in 1910. It is now 1924. Mr. Brennan, as a concerned citizen and taxpayer, is simply asking that the law be enforced. Judge Bennett examined the document. This deed appears genuine. It is genuine, Your Honor, pulled from the county records last month. And you're saying there's no record of full payment? None that we can find. The Springfield courthouse fire of 1922 destroyed many records, as you know. But if Miss Caldwell has proof of payment, we'd be happy to see it. Webb sat down. He looked satisfied, like a man who'd just played an unbeatable hand. Judge Bennett looked at me. Miss Caldwell, do you have proof of payment? I stood. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees and kept my voice steady. I do, Your Honor. I walked forward. I handed him the receipt we'd found in my father's trunk, the one dated November 1885, the one stamped paid in full. Judge Bennett read it carefully, then read it again, then looked at Webb. Mr. Webb, Miss Caldwell has a receipt showing full payment in 1885. Webb stood quickly. May I see it? The judge handed it down. Webb examined it. His face didn't change, but I saw his jaw tighten. Your Honor, he said, this receipt could be fraudulent. On what grounds? The Springfield courthouse fire conveniently destroyed any corresponding records. This could have been created at any time. It's signed by County Clerk Albert Morrison, I said, the same clerk who signed your deed. Morrison died in 1903, Webb said smoothly. There's no way to verify his signature. Then there's no way to verify yours either. That got a murmur from the courtroom. Judge Bennett banged his gavel once. Quiet, Mr. Webb, do you have any evidence that this receipt is fraudulent? Only the suspicious timing of its discovery, Your Honor. That's not evidence, that's speculation. The judge looked at me. Miss Caldwell, when did you find this receipt? Last week, Your Honor, in my father's personal papers. And why didn't your father produce it earlier when Mr. Brennan first started making inquiries about the land? Because Mr. Brennan never challenged ownership while my father was alive, Your Honor. He waited until my father died and left the land to a woman he thought couldn't defend it. Another murmur, louder this time. Judge Bennett didn't quiet it immediately. He let it run its course. Then he said, that's a serious accusation, Miss Caldwell. It's the truth, Your Honor. Brennan stood up. Your Honor, I object. Sit down, Mr. Brennan. You'll have your turn. The judge looked at the receipt again. This appears genuine to me. Same paper stock as the deed. Same clerk's signature. Unless Mr. Webb can provide concrete evidence of fraud, I'm inclined to accept it as valid. Your Honor, Webb said quickly, even if the land was paid for, there's still the question of whether Miss Caldwell is competent to manage it. She's unmarried, under 21, and by law requires a male co-trustee. She's named Elijah Freeman, a Negro farmer with no legal standing. Mr. Freeman has legal standing, I said. He's a property owner in this county, he's a taxpayer, and he's been my father's partner for 35 years. Partner Webb seized on that. Your Honor, if Mr. Freeman claims partnership, where's his proof? Where's his deed, his legal documentation? Elijah stood. He moved slowly, his broken arm still in a cast, but there was dignity in the way he moved. Authority, I have proof, he said. He walked forward. He handed the judge a piece of paper. I knew what it was without seeing it, the receipt Beatrice had brought me. The one showing Samuel Thornton's payment to my father in 1920 with the note, partnership offered. But Elijah had more. He pulled out a second document, older, yellowed with age. This is the original 1887 purchase agreement, Elijah said. between Silas Caldwell and myself. It shows two payments of $240, one from Silas, one from me. We bought that land together, Your Honor. Only put it in his name because Missouri in 1887 didn't look kindly on black property ownership. Judge Bennett read both documents. His face gave nothing away. Why wasn't your name on the deed, Mr. Freeman? Because in 1887, a black man on a deed was a target. We chose survival over paperwork. That's not how the law works. No, sir, but that's how survival works. The courtroom was dead silent. Webb stood up. Your Honor, a 40-year-old handshake agreement has no legal validity. If Mr. Freeman had a legitimate claim, he should have recorded it properly. He couldn't record it, Beatrice said. She stood up before I could stop her. Your Honor, my name is Beatrice Thornton. My father was Samuel Thornton. Before he died, he left me a letter explaining the whole arrangement. He worked with Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Freeman. He saw the partnership. Everyone in the county knew about it, even if the paperwork didn't reflect it. Hearsay, Webb said. It's testimony, Beatrice shot back. And I have 15 dairy owners outside who will testify that Miss Caldwell and Mr. Freeman run a legitimate business, that they've stored over 3,000 pounds of product in the last 4 months, that they've never failed a contract, that they provide the most reliable cold storage in 3 counties. Assuming Webb said coldly, their facility is still operational. I heard there was a fire last night. The courtroom erupted, people talking over each other. Judge Bennett banged his gavel 3 times and order, I'll have order or I'll clear this courtroom. He looked at me. Miss Caldwell, is this true? Was there a fire? Yes, Your Honor. At your storage facility? At the spring house, the entrance to our facility, the chambers themselves are undamaged. The product is safe. How did the fire start? I looked at Brennan. He looked back at me with eyes that showed nothing. I don't know, Your Honor. You don't know. I know it started late last night. I know it was set deliberately. And I know Colton Tench was there watching it burn. Tench stood up. That's a lie. Sit down, Judge Bennett said. His voice was sharp now. Everyone sit down. We all sat. The judge looked tired suddenly, tired and old. Let me see if I understand, he said. Miss Caldwell, you claim your father paid for this land in full. You have a receipt to prove it. Mr. Freeman claims partnership based on an 1887 agreement that was never officially recorded. And Mr. Brennan claims the whole thing is fraudulent and the land should revert to the county so he can buy it. That's correct, Your Honor. And last night someone set fire to your facility. Yes, Your Honor. And you're accusing Mr. Brennan's foreman. I'm saying he was there, Your Honor. I'm saying he watched it burn. I'm not saying anything more than that because I can't prove anything more than that. Judge Bennett was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'm going to take a recess 1 hour. When I come back, I want to hear from these dairy owners Miss Thornton mentioned. I want to understand exactly what kind of operation you're running up there. Then I'll make my ruling. He stood. Everyone stood. He left through the door behind the bench. The courtroom emptied into the hallway. Elijah, Beatrice, and I stood together while people filed past. Some nodded at us. Most ignored us. Brennan and Webb and Tench left without looking our way. That went better than I expected, Beatrice said quietly. It's not over, Elijah said. He believed us about the receipt. He believed we had a receipt. Doesn't mean he'll rule in our favor. I didn't say anything. I was watching Brennan through the courthouse windows. He was standing on the steps outside, talking to Webb, their heads close together, planning something. The hour passed slowly. We waited in the hallway. Dairy owners started arriving, men I'd worked with over the summer. Men whose cheese I'd stored, men who'd paid me and trusted me and gotten their product back in perfect condition. 15 of them, just like Beatrice had said. When Judge Bennett returned, he looked like he'd made a decision. There was something settled in his face. Call your witnesses, Miss Caldwell. I called them one by one: dairy owners, cheesemakers, men who'd used our facility. They testified about the quality of our storage, about the reliability of our temperature control, about the fact that we'd never failed a contract, never spoiled a product, never charged unfairly. One of them, a man named Porter who ran a dairy near West Plains, said something that made the courtroom go quiet. Your Honor, I have used commercial ice houses for 20 years. Paid good money for unreliable cold. This summer, when the drought hit and the ice houses failed, I lost $600 in spoiled cheese. Would have lost my business if Miss Caldwell hadn't had space for me. That cave of hers is the only thing that saved me. You're saying her facility is superior to commercial options. I'm saying it's the only option that works when everything else fails. When the last witness finished, Judge Bennett looked at me. Miss Caldwell, I've heard testimony that you run a legitimate business, that you provide valuable service, that you honor your contracts. But I've also heard that you're 18 years old, unmarried, and operating without proper male supervision as required by law. Can you explain why I should disregard that law? I stood. My mouth was dry, but my voice came out steady. Because the law was written to protect women from being taken advantage of, Your Honor, not to prevent them from succeeding. I have Mr. Freeman as my legal co-trustee. He signs every contract, approves every decision. The law is satisfied. Mr. Webb argues that Mr. Freeman's claim to partnership is invalid. Mr. Webb argues a lot of things, Your Honor. But the fact is, my father and Mr. Freeman worked that land together for 35 years, built something together, and whether or not the paperwork reflects it, the truth reflects it, and truth matters more than paperwork. That's a nice sentiment, Miss Caldwell, but courts run on paperwork. Then run on this paperwork. I held up the receipts, the notebooks, the testimony. Run on proof that my father paid for his land. Run on proof that we provide valuable service. Run on proof that someone tried to burn us out last night because they can't compete with us fairly. Judge Bennett's eyes narrowed. You're still accusing Mr. Brennan. I'm accusing no one, Your Honor. I'm just pointing out that if our operation was as worthless as Mr. Brennan claims, no one would bother sabotaging it. That got another murmur from the courtroom. Brennan's face went red. Webb stood up. Your Honor, these accusations are baseless and inflammatory. They're also probably true, Judge Bennett said quietly. The courtroom went silent. The judge looked at Brennan. Mr. Brennan, I've known you for 30 years. Known your family for longer. And I've watched you try to buy that ridge since the day Silas Caldwell outbid you for it in 1885. You've wanted that land for 40 years, and you've never made a secret of it. Your Honor, I'm not finished. Now, I don't have proof you set that fire, don't have proof you sabotaged Miss Caldwell's operation. But I do have proof that you filed this challenge within weeks of Silas Caldwell's death when his daughter was too young and too poor to defend herself properly. That shows me your character, Mr. Brennan. And I don't like what I see. He picked up the receipt I'd given him. This receipt is genuine. I'm satisfied of that. Miss Caldwell's father paid for his land in full. The debt Mr. Webb claims is fiction. As for the partnership between Silas Caldwell and Elijah Freeman, I can't validate an unrecorded 1887 agreement. But I can validate a 1920 agreement. He held up Samuel Thornton's receipt. This document shows Silas Caldwell doing business in partnership, taking payment, offering partnership to others. That establishes the pattern of business operation that included Mr. Freeman, whether the deeds say so or not. Judge Bennett put the papers down. He looked at me. Miss Caldwell, I'm ruling in your favor. You retain full ownership of the 48 acres. Mr. Freeman is recognized as legal co-trustee with 40% equity interest in any business operation on said property. Miss Thornton, as material contributor, is granted 10% partnership interest. The courtroom erupted, people shouting, some cheering, some angry. Judge Bennett banged his gavel. I'm not finished. Mr. Brennan, you're fined $1,000 for filing a frivolous challenge. Mr. Tench, you're fined $500 for suspected sabotage and arson. If another incident occurs on Miss Caldwell's property, I'll revisit this case and the penalties will be severe. He stood. Furthermore, I'm designating the cave system on Ashner's Ridge as a protected geological site. No mining, no excavation beyond what's necessary for cold storage operation. The site is to be preserved. He banged the gavel once more. This case is closed. We walked out of that courthouse into bright October sunshine. Elijah was smiling. Beatrice was crying. I was too stunned to do either. We'd won. We'd actually won. People crowded around us, dairy owners shaking my hand, town folks offering congratulations. Some of them probably didn't mean it, probably wished Brennan had won because that's how small towns work. But some of them did mean it. Some of them had seen something they liked, a girl who wouldn't quit, an old black man who got the recognition he deserved, a dead man's daughter making good on her father's dream. Brennan pushed past without speaking. Tench followed. Webb was already gone. I watched them go, watched Brennan climb into his truck and drive away. And I knew it wasn't over. Not really. The judge had ruled in our favor, but he couldn't change how men like Brennan thought, couldn't change the fact that we'd beaten him and he'd remember that. But for today, we'd won, and that was enough. We rode back up to the ridge in the wagon Elijah had borrowed. The three of us plus supplies we'd bought in town, new lumber, new tools, new locks for the doors. We were going to rebuild, better this time, stronger. When we reached the top, I stood in the clearing and looked around at the burned spring house, at the farmhouse that still needed repairs, at the ridge stretching east and west, broken and beautiful, hiding its secret in the dark below. Beatrice came to stand beside me. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about what comes next. Building forward. Over the next 3 months, we did exactly that. We rebuilt the spring house with stone and steel, made it fireproof, made it strong enough to last 100 years. We finished the stairway down to the 4th chamber, built shelving for 1,000 pounds of storage, installed proper ventilation and temperature monitoring. By January, we had 50 clients. By March, we had 75. The drought broke that spring, rain came back, the creeks ran full. The commercial ice houses started operating again, but people kept coming to us because we'd proven something the ice houses couldn't prove. We'd proven we were reliable. We'd proven we worked when everything else failed. And more than that, we'd proven we could be trusted. Elijah's arm healed. He went back to full-strength work. His grandson Isaiah started coming up on weekends to help. Kid was 14 and skinny as a rail, but he had his grandfather's patience and his great-grandfather's curiosity. He'd spend hours down in the chamber studying the airflow, asking questions about the limestone. That boy's going to run this place someday, Elijah said one evening. We were sitting on the porch, the three of us watching the sun go down. It was April of 1925, 1 year since I'd passed Elijah's test, 2 years since my father had died. Not if my kids run it first, Beatrice said. You don't have kids? Not yet, but I will, and they'll grow up knowing this place, learning it. By the time Isaiah is ready to take over, my kids will be ready to partner with him. Elijah smiled. Your father would have liked that partnership across generations. What about you, Rose? Beatrice asked. You thinking about the next generation? I thought about it. About marriage, about children, about passing this place on to someone who would care for it the way my father had cared for it. Someday, I said, but not yet. Right now, I'm still learning, still listening to what the earth wants to tell me. They were quiet for a moment. Then Elijah said, your father used to say the same thing. I know. Said the earth doesn't speak to everyone, only to people patient enough to hear it. And you think I'm patient enough? I think you're your father's daughter that's patient enough. We sat in comfortable silence as the light faded. Down below us in the cave, the air was moving. 54 degrees, constant, eternal. Breathing the way it had been breathing for 10,000 years, the way it would breathe for 10,000 more. And I thought about my father, about the 13 years he'd spent on this ridge, listening learning, building something that would outlast him. I thought about the journal entry I'd found in the fourth chamber, the last thing he'd written. Tell her I didn't leave her broken land. Tell her the earth chose her. I hadn't understood that when I first read it. Thought it was just sentiment. A father's love for a daughter he barely knew. But I understood it now. The earth had chosen me, had shown me its secrets, had taught me its patience, and in return I'd chosen it, had committed to protecting it, to building something on it that honored what it was instead of trying to force it into something it wasn't. That was the real inheritance, not the land, not the cave, not even the business. The inheritance was the listening, the patience, the understanding that some things can't be rushed and shouldn't be sold and won't be broken by people who value speed over wisdom. A week later, I got a letter. It came from the university in Colombia. From the geology department, they'd heard about the cave, about the constant temperature, about the geological significance. They wanted permission to study it, to map it properly, to document it for science. I wrote back the same day, said yes, said they could come in the summer, said they could map and study and document as much as they wanted as long as they understood one thing. This wasn't just a geological curiosity, this was a working system, a business, a partnership between three people and the earth itself, if they could respect that they were welcome. They came in June, 3 of them, 2 professors and a graduate student. They spent 6 weeks on the ridge, mapping the galleries, testing the air, documenting the water systems. What they found shocked them. The cave was bigger than my father had known, bigger than I'd guessed. It extended the entire length of the ridge and beyond. 4 main galleries, 2 underground lakes, 17 separate air systems, and everywhere, that perfect 54-degree temperature. This is one of the most significant karst formations in Missouri, the lead professor told me. His name was Renfro. He was young for a professor, maybe 35, and he had the excited energy of someone who just discovered something important. What does that mean? It means this cave system should be protected, preserved. It's not just valuable to you, it's valuable to science, to education, to understanding how these systems work. We're already protecting it. I know, and you're doing it right, but I want to make sure it stays protected even after you're gone. What are you suggesting? A designation, state geological site, federal protection if we can get it. That way no one can mine it, destroy it, or force you to sell it for development. I thought about that, about what my father would say, about whether he'd want government protection or whether he'd trust his daughter to protect it herself. But then I thought about Thaddeus Brennan, about men like him who would always exist, always be looking for ways to take what they couldn't earn. And I thought about Isaiah, about Beatrice's future children, about all the generations that would come after us. They'd need help protecting this place. They'd need more than just determination. They'd need the law on their side. All right, I said, do it. The designation came through in 1926. The cave system on Ashner's Ridge was declared a Missouri State Geological Site, protected by law, preserved in perpetuity. The business kept growing. By 1927, we were storing for 112 clients. We'd built out 2 more chambers, employed 23 people, made enough money to pay off every debt, repair every building, and still have enough left over to expand. I married in 1929. His name was Peter Whitmore, the grandson of the doctor who'd set Elijah's arm. He was quiet and steady, and he understood that I came with the ridge attached, that we were a package deal. He proposed to me in the 4th chamber, standing at the edge of the underground lake, with a lantern in his hand. I know you love this place, he'd said. Know it matters to you more than anything. I'm not asking you to choose between me and the ridge. I'm asking if there's room for both. There was. We had 3 children. The oldest we named Silas after my father. He learned to read a thermometer before he learned to read a book, same as I had. learn to listen to the earth the way his grandfather and great-grandfather had listened. By 1935, the cave was famous, not widely famous. We kept it quiet, it didn't advertise, it didn't want tourists tramping through, but famous among the people who mattered: geologists, dairy owners, people who understood what patience looked like when it's carved in stone. The federal designation came in 1936. Caldwell-Freeman Cave System became a national geological monument. There was a ceremony, a plaque, speeches by people who'd never met my father but who knew his name now. The plaque listed 3 names: Silas Caldwell, who discovered the cave; Elijah Freeman, who protected it; Rosalie Caldwell, who trusted them both. I stood at that ceremony with Peter beside me and my children around me, and Elijah, old now in his 80s, but still strong, on my other side. Beatrice was there with her husband and her 2 daughters. Isaiah was there, 25 now, running half the operation himself. And I thought about my father, about the letter I'd found in the 4th chamber, about his final message: tell her the earth chose her. I finally understood what he meant. The earth doesn't choose the loud ones, doesn't choose the ones who rush, doesn't choose the ones who try to force it into shapes it doesn't want to hold. It chooses the listeners, the patient ones, the ones who understand that some things can't be owned, only protected, can't be conquered, only understood. It chose my father, it chose Elijah, it chose me, and now it was choosing the next generation. I watched Isaiah that day, watched him talking to the geologist, explaining the air systems with the same patience his grandfather had taught me. Watched Beatrice's oldest daughter sketching the cave entrance, preparing to study architecture so she could design better storage facilities. Watched my son Silas, 10 years old, kneeling at the edge of the big crack where my father had first dropped his fishing line 43 years ago. Watching, listening, learning, the way we all had to learn, the way everyone who came after us would have to learn. That patience isn't passive. Patience is work. Patience is cold air in the dark, moving through stone for 10,000 years, doing its slow, perfect work whether anyone's watching or not. Patience is 13 years of dropping a line down a hole and counting the feet. Patience is a stone room breathing through the summer while every ice house in 3 counties fails. Patience is trusting that the earth knows more than you do, and having the humility to listen when it speaks. I'm an old woman now, 73 years old, as I tell you this story. The ridge is still there, the cave is still breathing, the business is still running. My son runs it now, Silas Caldwell II. He's got his grandfather's patience and his mother's stubbornness and his great-grandfather's wisdom. He'll run it until his children are ready. Then they'll run it until their children are ready. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. You don't own the land. You protect it. You don't control the earth. You listen to it. You don't rush what's patient. You learn to be patient yourself. And if you do that, if you really do that, the earth will give you what you need. Not what you want, what you need. My father understood that. Elijah understood that. And eventually, after enough time and enough mistakes and enough listening, I understood it too. I'll tell you what I know. I know that every person listening to this has been told something about them is worthless, has been laughed at when their name was read, has been given 48 acres of broken limestone that nobody wanted and everybody mocked. A talent nobody can price, a way of seeing that nobody values, a crack in the ground that everyone drives past without slowing down. And I know that beneath it, beneath the surface, beneath the thin grass of what people think they see, there's something moving, something cold and clean and older than any of us, something that's been doing its patient work for longer than you know, in the dark, in the deep rooms of the earth that nobody bothers to map. My father spent 13 years on his hands and knees at the edge of a hole in the ground. The county called him a fool. I spent one spring reading his notebooks and the ridge started to pay. The cave had been there for 10,000 years. What's breathing beneath you that nobody can hear yet? What have they told you is worthless? Kneel down. Put your hand on the ground. Listen. The earth knows more than any of us. And if you're patient enough, if you're quiet enough, it'll tell you secrets that'll change your life. I'm standing here today because I learned to listen, because my father taught me how, because Elijah showed me the way, because Beatrice believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and because the earth chose me, not because I was special, because I was patient. That's all it takes, patience. And the humility to listen when everyone else is shouting. The cave is still there, still breathing, still teaching anyone patient enough to learn. My great-granddaughter runs it now, fourth generation. She's studying karst hydrology at the university in Colombia, writing her dissertation on the Caldwell-Freeman system, discovering things about the cave that her great-great-grandfather never knew, because that's how it works. Each generation listens a little longer, learns a little more, passes it forward. The ridge will be there long after all of us are gone. The cave will be breathing long after the last person who knew my father's name has died. The earth will keep doing its patient work whether we're here to see it or not. But we were here. We listened. We protected something worth protecting, and that matters. That's the only thing that matters. This is where we tell those stories, the stories about patience and listening and trusting that the